Long ago, the Nerubians rebelled against their old god masters, but through Xal'atath once more, they find themselves tied up in the Void's game. And when we look into their history, there was one war that has brought them to this desperate point. That war is the War of the Spider, and it's what we'll be talking about today. Their ancestors ruled the world. The Akir, skittering creatures, each extensions of the old gods they served, their temple cities rose up into the sky until one day, the clouds of void broke and the Titans descended upon Azeroth. They made terrible war in the Black Empire, sending forth Keepers Tyr, Odin, and legions of Titanforged. And we know how that story goes. The old gods were chained, the Titanforged cleansed the Akir from the planet, but some buried deep and imagined a day when their empire would once again rise. So life in the world flourished. Soon intelligent races grew from the forests, and in this period, trolls reigned supreme. They worshipped the Loa, but some sought darker powers and foolishly called on Kha'Thix, a powerful servant of Yogg-Saron, and the very same Kha'Thix that had a part in slaying Tyr. Kha'Thix kept calling out to the sleeping Akir and launched a brutal war against the divided troll clans. But through the bravery of the trolls and the cunning of the Zandalari, they united into the first Troll Empire. This Zandalari Empire destroyed Kha'Thix and hounded the Akir to the four corners of Kalimdor. The Drakari trolls chased those who fled north, eventually settling in the snowy reaches of Zuldrak. Having been defeated once again, the Akir burrowed. But this time, something actually changed. Their focus slowly turned away from their old god masters. Instead, they created an empire of their own, Azjol-Nerub, one which would eventually eclipse the Drakarian Northrend. They were the greatest power in the continent. That is, until the Lich King arrived. And he arrived using today's sponsor. Where we're going to save some money, be more secure, and enjoy more convenience with nordvpn.com/Bellular Gaming. If you go there, you'll actually get 4 months for free on top of a 2-year plan, of course backed by their zero-risk 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, you probably know Nord for their VPN, but they're actually a suite of security and convenience tools. NordVPN lets you use the internet as if you're anywhere, so you can bypass regional restrictions and content, access streaming libraries of other countries, and even save money by region hopping to get a better deal. And that can save your ass if you're like booking a big trip, like my Florida trip last year. Now they've got apps on every major platform, which makes using Nord super easy. And then they're more than just a VPN. You'll also get Dark Web Monitor, which alerts you if your credentials have appeared in a data leak, and their threat protection tools. They've also got more up their sleeve. I mean, it's crazy. They've got NordPass, which just helps you be more secure, and it's super convenient. Forgetting passwords being a thing of the past is pretty awesome. Okay, if all this stuff sounds interesting to you, check out nordvpn.com/Bellular Gaming. The link is just down below in this video. You'll get 4 months off a 2-year plan, backed by their 30-day money-back guarantee. 27 years after Azeroth survived the fallout of Draenor's collapse, the culprit of that world's doom, Ner'zhul, was captured and put once again into service by his Legion masters. His soul was shorn from his body and placed in a suit of runic armor. He was given a Mournblade and, to complete his iconic set, the Helm of Domination. At this time, the Dark Portal had been destroyed. The Legion had no direct link from Draenor to Azeroth, so they shot him through the Twisting Nether to Azeroth until, one day, the sky opened over Northrend and Ner'zhul, encased in ice, plummeted to Icecrown Mountain. His mission was to establish a portal connection to Azeroth and make ready for the Legion's invasion. He was given 2 tools: immense power over undeath, and domination magic, something so strong it could break the will of even the strongest beings. The Lich King had arrived, and around his throne, his Nathrezim jailers built a great citadel. Now, the work didn't immediately begin. Ner'zhul's mind was fragmented, tortured. It reached out, feeling the powerful minds of troll priests and generations of sleeping Vrykul. In this time, he beheld the land that he realized he wanted to conquer. Not for his Legion masters, no, for himself. So, he began to test his powers. He spread plague. He began toying with the minds of magic users as they slept. As time passed, his undead warbands grew, taking in corpses of Tuskar, giants, and whatever else they fell upon. As this happened, the Lich King's personal power grew and grew, and as it did, he began to reckon with his rivals on the continent, the power-hungry Drukhari trolls, and below them, the Nerubians. Dealing with the Drukhari was simple. Their lust for power was quite easily manipulated, especially by one so powerful. The Lich King would, however, find his power insufficient for the second group. The Nerubians were very much ready to show Ner'zhul who the one true power on Northrend was. Across thousands of years of existence, Azjol-Nerub fought many wars with the surface dwellers. Their armies became feared by the Vrykul and an ever-present horror to Drukhari warbands. Now, its forces marched, and they marched forth from hundreds of tunnels throughout Northrend. Elite Deathwatcher units infiltrated Ner'zhul's citadel ahead of Anub-Barak's grand host. Ranks of battle guards supported by web-weaving casters and huge acid-spitting creatures. Giant spiders coaxed from the depths and ancient twisted magic of viziers being unleashed. A true horror. They converged on Icecrown, spider lords at the center of a heaving mass. And so, from across the continent, the forces of Azjol-Nerub pointed straight at Ner'zhul's throne. The Lich King was somewhat against the wall, and he couldn't call on many of the tools that we know him for. The Vrykul still slept in Jotunheim. No humans had came from Lordaeron. The Nerubians were not yet his slaves. The Scourge had no Death Knights. They had very few Liches, with Liches, of course, acting really as command and control for the undead masses. This meant that it all fell on Ner'zhul. For all the references we have of this war, there is no indication that the main Nerubian force ever breached the Wrathgate. Essentially, there was a long siege in front of that gate. A gate, of course, made of Saronite. Saronite is the crystallized blood of the Nerubians' once master, Yogg-Saron. Now, this siege could have dragged on for months or years, but there was only one possible conclusion. Ner'zhul redoubled his efforts. He cast the Plague of Undepth deep into the bowels of Azjol-Nerub, and although it was ineffective, small pockets of Scourge could still break out, leading to a violent crackdown on the plague's spread. And with this, the kingdom went into lockdown, and Anub-Barak began to realize some simple yet grim math. With each push they made towards the gate, or infiltration, he lost his forces. And when they died, they could be resurrected. One of the great strengths of the Nerubians is they were mostly immune to the plague, so they couldn't just be turned that way. But still, if they died, they would be resurrected. So this was not a good position. Shadowy figures walked unseen in the Nerubian camps at night, sowing chaos, assassinating key figures, and worse, those figures were coming back possessed. For all the might of his armies, for all the resistance they had to the plague, they did not have the strength to crack Icecrown's citadel, meaning it was essentially over. The weight of decision mounted. One last push on Icecrown, or a retreat into Azjol-Nerub, where they would be forced to fight tooth and nail as they essentially waited for the inevitable. Ultimately, the Nerubians pulled back, and as they did, the Dreadlords rose from Icecrown Citadel and led the resurgent Scourge into the depths of Azjol-Nerub. The initial defense fell to Crickthyr the Gatewatcher, who stood as a bulwark against the Scourge and held, essentially, the keys to Azjol-Nerub. The first wave was pushed back, the battle guard heaving against the corpses of their fallen brothers, but ultimately, the conclusion was foregone. While for generations Crickthyr had protected his people, soon the situation had changed. His body was dead, and as the undead swarmed over it, it was reanimated. Crickthyr left serving the Scourge. He was rather cursed to remain in his station, the Scourge Warden of Azjol-Nerub, put to rest eventually by adventurers during the war against the Lich King. Okay, the Scourge at this stage were still relatively limited, and this led to a brutal and protracted phase of the war. The Scourge sacrificed thousands and thousands just to win a few meters, and as much as that math might look okay, from the Nerubian perspective, they would yield a few meters, they would lose a few of their number, but then their number would be risen again to fight them. It was a losing situation. And with this, the kingdom began desperately to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. Every tunnel was choked with battle and corpses until finally Anub-Arak was cornered. He killed countless foes, but fundamentally, victory was impossible. And once the light of life vanished from his eyes, he felt a soul-crushing pain and one dominating command in his mind: to crush the empire that was once his. And with that, Anub-Arak was risen and turned on his people, beginning to mercilessly slaughter them. And for that, he was forever known as the Traitor King. For Ner'zhul, things were going exactly to plan. He raised Nerubian priests and had them kill their worshippers and burn their temples, lords made to eat servants, while generations of dead were raised from the crypts. A grisly example is Elder Nadox, once a wise and kind scholar. Ner'zhul drained everything wise and good, turning him into another mindless servant who hunted the scholars of Azjol-Nerub until one day he wandered into the old kingdom, Azj-Kahet, to blindly follow the whispers of Yogg-Saron. Azjol-Nerub's window of survival grew slim. They needed to dig their way out, but as their tunnels went deeper and deeper, deeper than they had ever dared before, they began to hear a chittering madness coming from those depths. Long thought a legend, the Nerubians never quite realized that they had built their empire around the prison complex of Yogg-Saron, and their once master was not pleased with them at all. The prison was breached. Void creatures boiled into the tunnels connecting to Azj-Kahet and quickly pushed the Nerubian workers into the Old Kingdom. They had nowhere to run. Yogg-Saron sent his herald, Volajaz, to declare death to the Nerubian race once and for all. And Volajaz was mostly successful. The few remaining living Nerubians were now faced with death at the hands of their once master Yogg-Saron, or being torn apart and made to serve a new master in Ner'zhul. And in a final act of defiance, a group of viziers released a tiny, unnoticeable spider. A special one that would eat and grow and shed without end, growing and growing, until one day it was massive enough to consume the Scourge infesting Azjol-Nerub. They instilled in it a desire for vengeance, a rabid fury, and released the spider known as Hadronox into the wild, where it would thrive, until one day, many, many years later, during the war against the Lich King, when adventurers slew the spider as they ventured into Azjol-Nerub. And as this empire died, the attacking forces of the Scourge and Old Gods met. They met at the border between the Upper and Old Kingdom, and there they mindlessly faced each other off whilst their masters, far away from all the action, weighed each other up. And whatever happened in that process, Yogg-Saron and the Lich King had their forces stop. Yogg's forces retreated from the front line, settling into Azj-Kahet, and for some reason, the Scourge stuck to their border as well. And as much as a lot of this is in the game's history, it is an area where we could yet find out more. I say this because after Wrath of the Lich King, Blizzard said that they had intended a deeper connection between Yogg-Saron and the Lich King, and they didn't really get to manifest it in-game. Of course, the context here is they originally planned for Azjol-Nerub to be a massive underground zone. That likely means then that there was intended lore, an intended connection between the characters of the Lich King, of course in that case the Arthas Lich King, and Yogg-Saron. And if we were speaking a year ago, I would say that's unfortunate, but it is what it is, and we're not going to find out what the intended connection was. That, of course, is different now, because in The Last Titan, Blizzard will be revamping the whole continent of Northrend. Of course, there have been little whispers and murmurings of Yogg-Saron, we're having Titans come back, and given the Nerubians being in our next expansion, I actually wouldn't be surprised if we found something out here. let's go back to the war's conclusion and our story. As the war went on, Ner'zhul essentially grew to respect the Nerubians. They were smart, he liked their architecture, and even them, they were smart, they were tenacious, they had a strong grasp of magic, they were resistant to his. So yes, the Nerubians themselves were raised to join his host, but Ner'zhul wasn't done. He regarded their towering ziggurats, and in them, he saw the bones of his new kingdom. He could raise these things from the depths, he could summon them anywhere his mighty will wanted, and from them, the Scourge could just pour out and rampage. And most notably of all, he pulled one particularly mighty temple from the depths and set it floating over Northrend, naming it Naxxramas. But he needed a lieutenant to helm it, someone with a mind twisted like his own before he died and became the Lich King, someone to lead his cult of the damned. With the conclusion of the War of the Spider, Ner'zhul was now Lord of Northrend. Yes, there were Drakari holdouts, but they were essentially sacrificing their own gods in this doomed attempt to gain the power they would need to resist. Ultimately, that failed. So Ner'zhul, by now, given everything that he had accomplished, was beginning to be ready to act, and he knew what his first target would be. It would be Lordaeron. He reached out and he felt the twisted presences of the most depraved people on that land, the likes of Darkmaster Gamling, the Barrel family, the Rivendares, and of course, Kel the Zad. And you mostly know how that story goes, right? It's the events of Warcraft 3 and its expansion, Wrath of the Lich King. And of course, both after Wrath of the Lich King and the War of the Spider, all seemed over for the Nerubians. But I say seemed, because it's time to talk about Azj-Kahet. It appears that during the frantic bid to escape their dying kingdom, some found tunnels that wove past the undead hordes and the old god's madness. They traveled ancient paths, ones once carved years ago by their fleeing ancestors. They were drawn, as their race instinctually is, given their origin, toward the prison of an old god. And so they went. They went south, they went west, until finally they found safety. A new home deep below the surface. And from there they built their strength, and along with their queen, they began to wage war with those they found above them. The Arathi, descended humans of Hallowfall, who exist in a brutal war of attrition against these Nerubians guarding the sacred light crystal, or at least sacred insofar as they see it. We think. That's what I currently believe the story is. Obviously, the War Within has not happened yet. Now, originally, the War Within's website described these Arathi humans as having battled the Nerubians for centuries. Now, if it was centuries, then obviously you have a little bit of a lore problem. How did the Nerubians, which are from Northrend, end up down there? Did it just happen to happen, or were they driven by the events of the War of the Spider? So you could see that as breaking our timeline. But actually, Blizzard have noticed this. The description of hundreds of years, that was on an official website. They have since changed that website. They have removed the reference to it being hundreds of years, which I think means that this can tie in with the War of the Spider, essentially giving us continuity. So because of that, I'm fairly sure that this is directly related to the War of the Spider. So yeah, given the change Blizzard made, I think we're safe. So, these Nerubians in Azj-Kahet. Again, think of the naming convention. You had An-Kahet, now we have Azj-Kahet. They are led by their queen, and they have struck a bargain with Xal'atath. They are helping her further her aims, and in return for that, they are essentially getting power to fuel a further evolution, which they hope can expand their empire. Back in Northrend then, only a few original Nerubians remain. There are a tiny group who neither fell to the Scourge or ended up being all old godded. We actually helped them. They, I think, had a clutch of eggs. Anyway, they are actually still active. They're still canon. Their most recent reference in any published Warcraft material is in Exploring Azeroth Northrend, which covers a period of time after the events of the Shadowlands, where the Bronzebeard brothers basically go on a bit of an adventure through Northrend. And while nothing major happens, they do basically say that, yep, there are some of those Nerubians, they're still there, they're friendly, and they're essentially eking out an existence amongst the ruins of their once mighty empire. So, as we go to War Within, I hope that number one, this video has helped you get a little bit more context of the enemies that we will face, but also might set up some lore thoughts, some opportunities, right? we'll be going back to Northrend in the Last Titan. That's where all the events of today's video have happened. Even in Northrend right now, there are friendly Nerubians. Will they somehow be involved in the war within? So, lots of stuff for us to think about. I absolutely loved making this video. A big thanks, of course, to today's sponsor for supporting this video. I mean, it's literally paying, me and the team's wages. So thanks to them. Thanks to you for watching. And of course, if you want to check out some more lore related to the upcoming World of Warcraft content A, I'm working on it, B, check out the video that will appear in place of my face. I will have literally picked it for you as a good one to watch after this one. Okay, that's it for me. Have a great day. Goodbye.